Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Matt Sprague. I'm Industry Strategy Director at Trimble, and excited to be here, excited to have our guest presenter, Aaron Walker, join us today. Aaron is a research manager for IDC within Government Trust and Resilience Strategy. Aaron, I know, has a slide at the beginning that tells you a little bit more background about him, so I will not do it justice. So I'll pause and not do that right now. Today's webinar, you're going to hear the latest research from IDC coming from Aaron on emerging technologies and regulations in federal, state, and local governments. So Aaron, like I said, is a research manager at IDC, and he'll share how to operate in edge computing environment while keeping your infrastructure protected from persistent threats, and assess the value of trending technologies and really much more. Before I hand it over to Aaron, I have one housekeeping slide, if you will, basically an advertising slide for us at Trimble. Coming up in May, we have our annual user conference called Innovate. So Innovate, really what we're doing is we're bringing together three popular user events. So we had eBuilder Elevate, CityWorks Innovate, and Agile Assets Exchange. And it's coming together in one dynamic conference focused on our asset lifecycle management solutions. So May 14th through the 16th in Cleveland, Ohio. Would love to have you there. A ton of sessions submitted by customers and partners, and internal sessions about our products have been released. A lot of engaging material there for you. Utilize the QR code or just search Trimble Innovate and you can find it online. We would love to see you out in Cleveland. So with that was my little intro and my housekeeping slide to go through. And I will stop sharing mine, and I'm going to hand this over to Aaron, so Aaron can share with you the abundance of information and engaging information that he has prepared for all of you.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Can you just confirm that you see my PowerPoint slide?
I can see it.
Awesome. Cool. So this next slide is what he was just referring to, which is just a little bit about me. I'm a research manager at IDC, covering security, trust, and resiliency strategies in government across all levels: state, local, federal, and
Aaron,
tribal.
can I interrupt one thing?
Yep, go for it.
I'm sorry, bad housekeeping on my part. We will have a Q&A session at the end of Aaron's presentation. Please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A functionality of Zoom, or if you do it in the chat area, I'll be moderating and looking over those and be able to feed Aaron those questions at the end. And I promise I will not interrupt again.
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate that. And yeah, I do have a slide at the end just to mark when we'll do that. But yeah, there's a ton of slides here. I'll definitely leave at least 15 minutes or so for us to kind of dig deeper on some of the things I touch on. But yeah, with me, I came to IDC about a year and a half ago. I spent 7.5 years at a company called G2, formerly G2 Crowd. But I built out pretty much all of their security taxonomy, development tools, IT, etc. Also in a previous life was a political reporter, so I had a ton of government interests, and then saw this opportunity at IDC to kind of combine my two passions. So now I'm doing the same thing in terms of covering emerging technologies, just in the frame of government. Pretty much everything through a security lens, but trying to help government organizations of all size protect people's data and increase their ability to provide services, because that is what government does. But three kind of key topics that I touch on are securing those emerging technologies, which are usually edge devices, IoT, 5G, 6G, things like that, that are kind of making their way into the market, but are not necessarily being implemented with the most security conscious mindset. So then in addition to that, I touch on trust, mostly in the form of data privacy, a lot also in the form of kind of availability, uptime, because I think those are two of the biggest ways government can build trust with people is by obviously making sure that their data is safe, but also getting them the services they need when they need them. And then most recently, I've added sustainability as a topic just because it wasn't really being covered in a government way within IBC. And I think it's really interesting. And a lot of those kind of sustainability field devices do have a ton of security considerations to keep in mind when kind of engaging in those initiatives. So on the right, don't have to get into too many of these, but just to get an idea of some of the research that I do. I do have a couple of our Futurescape is what we call it, but there are predictions going forward from 2024. I just published a MarketScape, which is kind of like a market assessment report on security service providers for federal agencies. And then I have a couple other documents about securing critical infrastructure, implementing SASE, data privacy, and then just kind of trends in general. So this is a little bit of the agenda. I'm going to kind of show you a bit overall of what I'm going to get into, then touch on some things at the federal level, followed by state and local. And then I'll kind of dive into some of those technologies, get a little more in depth there. I know we're not all technical folks, I myself included, so I'll try to keep those fairly surface level. And then a couple quick things about trends across the Americas, because I did also recently publish a report on that, and it is interesting. And then just another kind of highlight slide, and then some advice for government decision makers considering adopting some new and emerging technologies. So here, these are just some of the major strategic challenges across government of all levels. The mandated initiatives are more prevalent at the federal level just because they are enforced there, developed there. So things like EO 14028, securing supply chains, safe and secure use of AI, bunch of CISA requirements for log monitoring, incident response, things like that. And across government, I think I have a number later in the slides, but it's something like 36,000 open positions have been available. That number keeps going up every year for skilled cyber staff in government. One of the things that is really holding back some of these modernization efforts. Procurement cycles can be difficult in government as well. They're very slow. They are predictable, but yeah, they do slow things down at times. Maintaining compliance is very important in a security way, but as government is very regulated, that can also cause problems. Government is also interesting because less at the federal level, though smaller agencies that are kind of the child of a larger agency within it have really not robust security programs in place, but places like the DoD and CISA have some of the most cutting edge cybersecurity programs that exist in the world. And the same goes for small cities, communities, towns, compared to places like New York City, which have really interesting cyber command operations. There's a ton of work that needs to be done for a lot of the smaller organizations, and even though they might not get the funding or the attention, they still house a ton of valuable and sensitive personal information for citizens that need to be secured. And then a lot of the mandated efforts, at least at the federal level, are not funded. So like every agency has to at least come up with a zero trust plan by the end of the year, but they don't necessarily have additional funds to meet that. They have to kind of allocate year by year, and that can hold off or hold back long-term planning to some extent. A lot of these technology challenges just have to do with modernizing and the number of devices that are connected to internet systems. Cloud adoption requires basic security. It does require collaboration with your cloud service provider. But if you are running your own hardware, that is a huge threat vector for things like malware, supply chain attacks or ransomware. Having those legacy servers unpatched is very risky. And that is a component of the attack surface, but so is everything that is connected to the environment, including your laptop, your phone, IoT devices, your smart thermostat, if that's in your building, or anything else that is intelligent, does need to be allocated for, because in theory could have a vulnerability that allows a threat actor to penetrate your network and do a bunch of bad stuff. So driving some of these modernization initiatives, a lot of the mandates, just a need for adding services, having applications to make your employees more efficient, having a way for constituents to obtain request services without having to do so with pen and paper or in person. Some of those skilled worker shortages get into the demand for automation. People are always trying to increase trust and transparency in government as well. These are some of the emerging technologies that I do touch on later. I think Gen AI is probably the trendiest, most interesting one, and I definitely have a couple slides on that. Those typically map to some of these areas of investment. It's always a little confusing trying to map point solutions to use cases, but I guess SASE and Zero Trust, there are a combination of tools that are used to achieve a goal. So yeah, they map there. And then service-based solutions are also very popular because government organizations are trying to outsource things that they can't actually operate themselves or don't have the skilled staff to do so. So I know that was a lot, but I'm going to get into some of these federal challenges on a deeper level. 39,000 is the number of open cybersecurity openings in government, which is an absurd number. And those are great, high-paying jobs, but government can't necessarily provide the same salaries or benefits that a lot of your Silicon Valley tech companies do. So even if they upskill cybersecurity staff, a lot of the time, once they really get that 5-10 years of experience, they'll up and leave. So there are also initiatives to kind of encourage workplace training and other benefits to keep people in government when there are appealing alternatives. But these are some of those compliance issues. Those executive orders are not necessarily funded and they require a lot of work and a lot of new technology. Things like FedRAMP are cool. They do standardized security controls and centralize a marketplace for SaaS, so people can just go in there and buy things, but it's not necessarily an intuitive program, especially for organizations that are just now beginning their cloud adoption. Procurement obviously varies location to location or the type of organization that you have, but federal employees seem to continuously insist that it is holding back some of their modernization efforts. And I think observability and asset management tie a lot to that expanding attack surface, but it is very difficult to really fully understand all of the devices, all of the people, all of the activities that are happening on your network without having really modern monitoring, continuous monitoring technology to do so. So these get back into the more of the technical level, but that cloud adoption is a challenge. It is helped by things like FedRAMP, but there are still tons of organizations that still have their own servers, mainframe systems, DMZ, borders to protect people from getting into the network. And those, for the most part, have to be modernized or replaced or kind of component by component modernized. And a lot of that also has to do with paper processes in government, which is one of the last places that's still a major thing, aside from nonprofit, which I know from experience. But yeah, supply chain attacks continue happening and people continue to cause them. So we need things like software and hardware bills of materials. So you know that all of the the components in your application or your network or whatever you're working with are secure, and that the people that you are entrusting to operate and maintain them are acting appropriately and not increasing risk. Because things like ransomware happen as a result, and for government, a lot more than other organizations, people are the cause. As you can see here, clicking a URL or opening a link from a phishing email are the two most common ways that threat actors get into government networks to commit ransomware attacks. For other people, it's more insider threats or peripheral devices, supply chain attacks. But government still has to do some work in making sure that their employees are not susceptible to things that can really devastate an organization or hold back a government from providing services or being available to people in need. So these are just some of the benefits of adopting the cloud, why people are doing this in the first place. It makes things easier to deploy. It makes it easier to build, run an application without having to do so incredibly manually. Things like containerization, Kubernetes, Docker, etc., make things easier too, because you can kind of plug and play applications together. Makes you more agile, can reduce costs too. Also, open source components are free. So that helps there. But honestly, public versus private, I don't know if that is the most important differentiation to make, because pretty much everybody is adopting some level of multi-cloud system that incorporates both public and private cloud infrastructure. Mostly private cloud for things that you are more concerned with security. If there are workloads that interact with sensitive data sets, those are probably the ones that you'd like to keep behind an additional layer of security. Other things, maybe not so much. But there are a ton of benefits to adopting the cloud in terms of making your employees happier, making your constituents happier, and making everybody's life a little bit easier. And these are some of the considerations for organizations adopting the cloud. Obviously, data security is a very high priority. For people who are just now moving to the cloud, it could be confusing who owns what in terms of security. Before the cloud, if you had your servers, you were responsible for pretty much every aspect of security from that point. But if you're using SaaS, you're basically trusting that what you're putting into the SaaS application is secure. So there's a few levels to that, depending on how familiar you are. Infrastructure as a service provides the infrastructure, but you still have to secure the data and all of the components. There's kind of a tiered from infrastructure to platform to SaaS. So if you're running stuff on AWS GovCloud, you are still responsible for securing a lot of the data, the databases, operating systems, whatever's deployed, but AWS will manage some of the infrastructure security for you. But a lot of the time, government organizations that are just moving things to the cloud need a little bit of help understanding that shared responsibility. So specific to cybersecurity investment, the drivers are more specific to attacks, to data protection, to meeting those mandates. Thankfully, a lot of organizations do have security as a top-down priority, but not so thankfully. A lot of these government organizations are victims of attacks. Honestly, that number of DoD at 40% being higher than other agencies is probably the result of their understanding of how they were attacked, their ability to detect that and eliminate false positives. Everybody is being attacked, but these aren't too different depending on the organization. In-house cybersecurity is not really an issue at DoD because they can pay better than other agencies and they're doing more cutting edge things. So I think people are really excited to work there. Not so much for some of the more lagging agencies in terms of modernization. They all need more staff. They all want to not get attacked. And yeah, these are things that might hold back some of the future investments. Inflation is apparently less of a concern in government, I think mostly because some of their cybersecurity initiatives are already unfunded, so they can't really have less than zero money to do anything. But those budgetary cycles are a little more predictable. So that might also involve there. Geopolitical turmoil, I was surprised when that was lower in government, but I think they have a little bit more faith in their stability than some of the private sector does. But obviously staffing and labor shortages were the number one in government. Could talk about that all day, but they are really desperate for skilled staff. There are a lot of cool, I'll get into that. I have a slide for upskilling and whatnot there. So these are some of the kind of technologies on a super high level that agencies are investing in. The orange one's DoD, that is really going to be the one that is the most different just because they're really in their own world. They have a lot of the more baseline security tools in place. They had MFA years ago, they had monitoring years ago. Unlike many of the smaller agencies, now they're working more to implement SASE or XDR, or probably using identity management as a ploy for zero trust, because that is a key pillar there and kind of something that ties a lot of the other zero trust maturity components together, relies on having a robust identity security program in place. I think a lot of those efforts on encryption are also because they're the ones researching post-quantum cryptography, which is a mouthful, but basically quantum computing can pretty effectively get around or bypass traditional encryption methods. There are also, as of the past year, other forms of hacking that don't require a quantum computer that do bypass some of the more rigorous encryption protocols that exist. And then, yeah, basic endpoint security, that's your computers, your phones, everything that's attached to the network, those have to be secured. Network and cloud, pretty intuitive. Analytics, there's a big CISA requirement for agencies. Their continuous diagnostics and mitigation program that requires a lot of logging, CONMON, which is continuous monitoring, and other efforts that are kind of driving investment there. This is just an example of how advanced DoD is compared to a lot of those civilian agencies. A SASE or SOAR technology, they're two different things, but SASE is basically having a robust, mature, zero trust, least privilege management policy in an organization paired with a software-defined network to help you extend those policies to remote workers outside of your network. It's kind of the next evolution of secure work from home with BYOD. Everybody's device might be different operating systems, tablets, phones. They could be geographically all over the board, but they all still need to have the same security controls in place. You need to be able to detect when somebody's doing something they're not normally doing, or they're in a place they shouldn't be, or things like that. And then SOAR is an automation technology for security operations. It uses machine learning to kind of connect all of your disparate cybersecurity tools, from detection to investigation to response remediation, to kind of trigger those automatically to minimize the need for the skilled cybersecurity staff that is so short in the government space. But as you can see, most civilian agencies are still researching it, while DoD is either implementing it or already has it in full production. That's pretty much what I've seen since joining IDC, is civilian agencies will follow suit just a couple of years down the line. So Gen AI is a big trend. I think it's interesting. I think everybody uses it, or at least is curious to. but a lot of people are kind of getting ahead of themselves and using it without really considering what they're doing. Maybe putting information into it that is sensitive without really thinking about where it's going. But that could endanger an organization. It is probably illegal, and people still do it anyway. But as you can see, the prediction at the bottom of this, by 2027, 95% of nations will have experienced a major cyber attack that was caused by a threat utilizing Gen AI, but only 30% will have the security resilience to prevent significant disruptions or breaches. That's basically saying that organizations like the DoD, some of the larger ones, will have enough detection, threat hunting done beforehand to know where those vulnerabilities are, enough automation to quickly respond to threats before they get out of control. That's only going to be capable, at least in the beginning, for some of the more advanced agencies. Other ones will struggle, they will get attacked. Gen AI poses a lot of threats in addition to solutions. Most of the solutions are for efficiency, or making the security staff's job easier, but on the hacker side, they make malware adaptable, they make phishing emails more believable, they make everything a little bit harder to detect. And yeah, that'll require a lot of effort once the threat actors get really skilled there, with a little more experience. And this is the other kind of key prediction for the federal government that I had made last year. Because of that shortage of skilled workers, I predicted that by 2026, 60% of governments will focus on upskilling and reskilling civil servants to improve their work experience and citizen services, their ability to deliver those citizen services. But like I said, it's hard for government to compete with companies that can give unlimited PTO and have a cool, trendy tech office, or completely remote and work all over the place. It's difficult. Government just has more regulation. They have stricter rules about who can work from home, what can be done from home, things like that. They have fewer tools that make developer security staff's jobs easier for things like a digital AI assistant or automation stuff, or like interactive application security testing is kind of a nice to have tool, but not necessarily something every organization needs. But it does make testing easier and more effective. And just an example of something that a really robust security team will have, but maybe not so much on a team where two people within IT are doing most of the cybersecurity. In an interesting way, for upskilling, I have seen a ton of cool AR, VR, immersive reality training things, not necessarily for cybersecurity, more for people in the field, military, or first responders, to get a really cool immersive reality to train in, to have those threats appear to be in real life, to simulate things that you just can't in the real world without creating a fire, putting someone in a war zone. So yeah, those are also upskilling, not necessarily directly related, but still interesting. So that was a lot of federal. Let's get into state and local a little bit. This is just a little bit of the difference on the procurement front. Federal governments are working with FedRAMP, they have contract vehicles, but state and local governments have a little bit more diversity there. Some states have statewide acquisition models, like the California Department of Technology can implement an initiative to buy software that can be used throughout the entire state. Other states do that on a more agency by agency, organization by organization stance. And then cities vary completely differently, but do have pretty standard cycles of procurement. Other things are partnerships, open source. Those are all really appealing to government because they kind of increase access without increasing costs. And in terms of FedRAMP, which outlines some over 30 security controls specific to a NIST framework. A lot of states are implementing what they're calling state ramp, which does require the same security controls, varies state by state. Like Texas has Tex ramp, but other states doing state ramp are doing it collaboratively. FedRAMP can also be used by state and local organizations or tribal. Anybody in the public sector can use those tools, but just making it more available and specific to regions. I think state ramp is appearing. Both of them have the same requirements, third-party assessment requirements, security controls, and then status levels, which take a long time for vendors to achieve. But once they do, they're kind of in there. Every time they do have an update, they have to get it approved because it contains new code that could pose new risks. But it really does make it easier for kind of a DevOps powered SaaS tool to be available to government in a secure fashion. So comparing the two, data security is a little less important at the federal level, I think, because they have some of those baseline requirements already. There's a little bit more freedom in state and local organizations, depending on where you are. And in a lot of ways, that means people are not necessarily practicing cybersecurity in the way that they should, or the way that the federal government would mandate they do. So increasing their security efficacy there is very important. They also, the federal government buys a lot more on existing relationships if they've had success with the vendor before, where I think state and local government are a little more open to trying new things or experiencing vendors or playing around because they do a lot more in a central way. Most federal agencies have more of a large centralized single purpose per agency where a city has to do basically everything. And it's different. So yeah, I think some of the other interesting ones, federal government is interested in provider innovation. That could come in a lot of ways. I think a lot of the time I talk to federal government, they are looking for innovation in terms of like achieving continuous HEO, which is authority to operate. Basically, anytime you change components in your system, you need to get a new HEO, and making that easier is innovative, but not necessarily what most people in the market would call innovative. And the last one I'll touch on is the availability zones. A lot of federal government requirements have require that data centers or places that are processing data are located domestically. I haven't seen that discussed as much at the state and local level. I'd guess more at the state level, there are more regulations around that, but definitely at the federal level. So this gets a little more into Gen AI at the state level. Each year, IDC publishes futurescape predictions on both national government and state and local. So the other two were the ones that I wrote for the national government. This was the one for state and local. That by 2026, cyber attacks and crimes caused by weaponized Gen AI will impact 90% of local and regional governments, driving adoption of new human-centered cybersecurity and public safety approaches. That gets back to some of the tools that I was mentioning that either kind of coach you to not commit risky practices or just kind of have built-in guardrails that don't allow people to do things that are risky inherently. I think that's the way to go about it. Design things without letting people, without giving people the ability to cause risk is the safest way you can go about it because you can never predict what everyone's going to do. So yeah. But Gen AI is cool. In terms of security, defensive capabilities, some of the more common ways are kind of automating the creation of playbooks, So like you don't have to spend time creating a 20-page guide for your incident response staff to know what to do if something happens. You can just press a button, generates it there specific to your requirements, your needs, your systems. But there are a lot more on the threat actor side in terms of those like very convincing phishing emails, kind of reverse engineering malware, making it more adaptable. Those things will be defended against using AI, but mostly in the automation and threat hunting detection sense. So this gets into that a little bit. Our survey showed that there is a big eagerness in state and local government in federal government to adopt AI, mostly for automation purposes. But we have another FIR survey that I didn't have the data in here for, but the vast majority of government organizations everywhere are looking to utilize Gen AI, not necessarily today. There are kind of two security concerns that need to be addressed before that really happens. The first one is governing the use of Gen AI. I'm publishing a piece right now, actually, about a few vendors who've developed tools to either detect the inputting of sensitive data into Gen AI or other kind of misuse like that. So people just can't do it, or at least the organization is aware of if people are doing it. And then the other way is actually using Gen AI to create those playbooks or to do some other kind of AI assistant or defensive or efficiency enabling capability. So now I'll dive a little bit more into some of those technologies. SASE, I've already gotten into a little bit. It is kind of that next step after zero trust, creates kind of a central risk model with different components like a firewall, a web gateway, a CASB, or zero trust network access control. Those tools all kind of continuously assess people's behaviors, network traffic, and every other kind of factor that goes in there to continuously approve access. That's really important when people have a wide variety of devices or in a lot of locations. If somebody's device gets stolen and somebody's doing something weird, you'd be able to detect that. If somebody got your login credentials and was logging in from another country or region, that would pop up and you'd be able to cut off control there. That basically is the pairing of SD-WAN and zero trust on a large scale level. But zero trust is the next one there. Basically means providing least privilege access, so only giving control or access to the things that specific people need based on their role or who they are. It kind of prevents things that were very traditional, like a DMZ architecture, like a moat type system. If you get into the network, you were trusted. We said, oh, you have the right credentials. We believe you are who you are. So now you can run free within our network. No, that's not how it works. Once people do that, if a threat actor stole your credentials and got in there, then they could access every database, every system, all the infrastructure, et cetera. But if you have some kind of least privilege access, once they get in, they get segmented into different components. So every time they try to access a new system or data set, a new risk assessment would take place and probably, hopefully, detect that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. The only one I think that I haven't really gotten into is cloud compliance and posture management, which is a very new type of tool. But cloud environments have a ton of security controls, a ton of configurations that need to be assessed continuously. And without doing so, you leave a ton of gaps in your entire ecosystem because you can get from a SaaS application into other things to any connected system is really put at risk there without proper policy enforcement. So this, just to visualize that SASE framework, people, device, and their location are assessed. They put in here to a unified access control system that's getting data from all of these security tools. And then once you are approved, You can get access to data, to SaaS tools, to support, to what have you. It's just a more efficient way to do this without really inhibiting people's like it doesn't have low user adoption because it's not constantly prompting you with verification things. It's doing a lot of it behind the scenes. You might have to have an app on your phone to verify as like an MFA type thing, but for the most part, it's kind of assessing security for you as you're doing everything just behind the scenes. Mhm. These are some of the defensive ways that Gen AI can help organizations. Like I said, kind of creating that incident response content. There are ways that, like I said, Gen AI can be used to reverse engineer code. It can also be used to detect vulnerabilities, or if a developer is trying to write code with existing vulnerabilities, it can detect that, replace it, or give suggestions for different code to use. It can improve your ability to detect threats just based on previous threat actor behaviors. Automating security tasks is very important, obviously, with security staff that is overworked. They're doing less kind of menial, mundane things and giving them more time to actually investigate threats or respond to them quickly. Yeah. Mhm. These are just some of the considerations. I might have touched on this a little bit earlier, but people aren't really going to migrate their most sensitive workloads into the cloud right away. They'll probably do something with a little less impact first. People would typically want to get cloud workloads that impact service delivery. If there's like a web app interface relying on a cloud workload, that's probably fairly high priority, but a database containing a bunch of constituent PII is probably not the first thing you want to go put into the cloud while you're still experimenting and optimizing your controls and practices there. So with all of these new endpoints, that expanding attack surface, IoT endpoints everywhere, your smart thermostat, your remote worker, that creates a whole lot more data in transit. Each thing that you do on that device sends that information somewhere else. And that information needs to be secured both on your device and while it's being sent somewhere. That is very important, especially at the federal level. I know this is in the technology section, but interagency data sharing is a big trend that we are seeing today. In one of the more interesting ways that kind of maps to state and local, I think, is sharing data on service availability, kind of creating a portal with data on services from different federal agencies in a centralized location. So you can kind of see, okay, this is me. These are the types of services that are available in one place rather than going to each agency's website, inputting your own specific information, doing your own research. You can kind of just be presented with a holistic view of everything that's available to you. I personally think it should be and will be done, but like creating a conversational interface there. I've seen a lot of conversational AI pop up elsewhere, but I think for constituents, that would be a big trust builder, a really big kind of lower the burden to entry for requesting things. If a person could just go to their computer, speak in the way that humans talk and say, "Hi, I'm having this problem. I would like to get these help with this. What kind of services are available?" And then it just outputs things that are tailored to you based on what you've told it. I think that's interesting and innovative, but still requires a lot of data security. But yeah, so human-centric security is also very important. These are the ways that people typically, or threat actors typically get into an environment, steal your data or bring down your website, is because of those unpatched systems, clicking those emails, and yeah, just really preventable things that humans can be trained out of. But like I said, people are going to do things that they shouldn't do. And as much as you can, try to create those guardrails to prevent their ability to do so. Attack surface management, this just kind of expands on some of those new needs to secure tons of devices. And like the Department of Energy has an unfathomable number of endpoints in the field, and each of those needs constant monitoring, constant security. Anything that's connected to the internet has to be allocated for. Shadow IT is a huge problem in government. I think a lot of people, because the procurement cycles are so rigorous, people will download mostly SaaS apps on their own personal computers for their own task manager or some kind of efficiency assistance. But without being centrally managed, who knows what kind of security controls there are, who knows what data is being input there. And it really just all has to be documented continuously. So I'll do these really quick. I wrote a report earlier this year about trends in security across North and South America and the Caribbean, but basically showed that there are varying levels of development. The US and Canada had they had the more robust cybersecurity programs in place. But since probably 2019, 2020, pretty much every Latin American country has been developing one of their own, increasing their public-private partnerships, trying to do cloud adoption, trying to modernize policing. There's so many things that they are currently working on, but they are very different everywhere depending on the country or the region. There's a big difference. But as you can see here, these are kind of just a third-party aggregate estimate of the security controls and policies in place in different North American country or America's countries. But these are the things that they are addressing through policy, typically kind of trying to develop that culture from leadership top down to explain to citizens, to their staff, their civil servants, why it's important, how to secure, how to modernize securely, how to reduce that risk and improve their ability to get things into the citizens' hands that they need to do pretty much anything else they're asked to do. So here, this is just a pretty big summary of everything that I've already gone into. I don't think I touched too much on decision makers, but that's more of interest to people not working in government. So yeah, general benefits, spending factors, migration considerations. There's a lot. Everything has to do with kind of minimizing risk, putting as much guards around sensitive data as you can, especially when kind of shifting everything around and completely revamping something from a legacy system to a cloud environment. So these are just a couple suggestions, a lot related to AI, but automation, huge need. Agencies also need help, mostly, or sorry, don't speak for any state or local organization, but like the state and local cybersecurity grants from CISA are not actually available to federal agencies. So they have to allocate for budget or do things in public-private partnerships, and it can just be a little more confusing there. Gen AI, interesting, but cautiously adopt it, explore it. It can really, IDC is an initiative testing a AI efficiency bot, and it has made my life a lot easier. So I mean, it does improve performance and efficiency for a lot of things, but there's risk that needs to be accounted for. So yeah, I think the last most important one is trusted partners can really help make every kind of project easier. It's you get a little bit more comfortable knowing that their supply chain is ethical and secure. You can access tools and services and data sets for reduced costs. And you can just benefit from some kind of advancements in the private sector that might not have made their way into the public sector. So with that, and only 10 minutes, I apologize, I said 15, but time for some Q&A.
Awesome. Aaron, thank you so much for this. We do have a handful of questions that have come in, and please, anybody who's still listening and engaged here, please feel free to continue to add them. I have a window open that I can see anything that's added in here. One thing, I'm going to selfishly kind of ask one question, but it does segue into a question from one of our viewers. And it has to do with there was like a common theme I kind of saw throughout that, specifically on the bottom ticker, if you will, that it was you know, like, hey, by 2026 90% are going to experience this, or
Mhm.
you know, those type of things. So like I'm seeing like a, hey, it's a act now, right? It's like the if you haven't already experienced a cyber attack, it's almost like it's imminent. Is that a fair like thing to say? Am I fear mongering?
No, you're not fear. I mean, it sounds a little scarier than it is because a lot of cyber attacks don't actually have super drastic outcomes. But government organizations that are saying, hey, we've never had a cyber attack, are probably not aware of very minor ones that have happened. So I do think it is very much an act now thing. I think threat actors are not going to be as cautious about implementing some of the more cutting edge tools that make their attacks more effective. They're just going to jump right in, test it out, see if it works. But government is going to be like, okay, before we use this for a defensive capability, we want to make sure that it works and test it and do all the things they should be doing. But that might put them a little bit not ahead of the attacker.
Yeah. And so if you think about like where people are in their journey, right? There's different levels of sophistication, if you will.
Mhm.
And you know, the you made mention to the state ramp and the Fed ramp side of things, that is that's really thinking about like that jump from those organizations that are, well, it's not necessarily that they're making a jump from an on-prem to a SaaS, but it's purely of like, hey, if you're using SaaS, you should be leveraging
Mhm.
solutions that are certified to a certain level of cybersecurity. But I think also when I talk about the span is that you have those that are still on-prem,
Mhm.
and just purely making a jump to cloud. Forget about state ramp, forget about FedRAMP, but just making a jump to cloud. There's inherent cybersecurity involved in that, right?
Definitely. And there are things like the CMMC cyber maturity model certification that organizations can do to kind of see a level one, level two on this specific topic. I think Zero Trust Maturity also has guidelines for like 6 pillars: identity, device, data, application, and governance. But there are tiers of it. So like adding multi-factor authentication is probably tier one for access control or identity. But there are like baby steps that you can take specifically if you're doing something for the first time. You might want these baseline monitoring or patching systems, but like you don't necessarily need super cutting edge automated response stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of levels to it, definitely.
Gotcha. And one of the things, one of your last slides, the bottom part was about, it was the advice slide that made mention to, and this is kind of like selfishly plugging Trimble, is like finding a partner that you can leverage for. So for the for those of you listening and whatnot, obviously we're bringing you the cybersecurity message here because we believe in it wholeheartedly, and love to communicate with all of you and help you continue this journey. But part of that journey is, and this is a question, you just answered one of the questions, which was about CMMC. The other question, we're talking about like people, you know, going through this journey to address cybersecurity issues. So, you know, I'll read it, right? It says often budgets for local government entities are tight. cybersecurity is always a priority, as it should be. So they're curious about federal, state level cybersecurity grant information. So
Mhm.
they're really like they're asking about like, do you have like a any good resources to point them towards to help
Yeah.
pay for some of the stuff?
The best one is literally called the State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program. But that's run by CISA. I can pull up a link to it, but it basically is an opportunity to either partner or get initiatives funded for cybersecurity modernization programs. Uh, I believe tribal and educational institutions are also eligible. So that's the first place I would go. There's a couple other public-private partnerships for like specific initiatives related like zero trust or data security. But that's the broadest and the biggest for sure.
So there was a question, just so that this person doesn't think I'm ignoring them, around the Fed ramp and state ramp and other type of requirements out there. I think you just brought up the CMMC
Mhm.
piece to it as well. That I know this question was asked prior to you getting to the Fed and state ramp piece within your area within your presentation. So another question I think goes back to way at the beginning. They said, are you seeing government agencies using Kubernetes or Docker? I haven't seen too many applications that we use that are compatible with that.
More Kubernetes than Docker, but yes, mostly at the federal level, I think. Yeah, I don't know too much compatibility wise about like migrating things and containerizing them. But I have had good amount of discussions where people are deploying Kubernetes clusters, like very complex Kubernetes clusters at large scale in the federal government for sure.
Gotcha. And then one last question that just came in. It was, what are the trends in physical security? So intrusion and access of critical infrastructure.
So physical, I have not touched as much on physical security as I would like to. But I did have a good conversation last week with a company that was doing really cool biometric analysis for like facial recognition, gait analysis. So even like identifying someone by the way you walk. Um, those were two interesting kind of AI-ish ones. But a lot of other stuff is kind of making sure that cards that get you into a building cannot be replicated or tampered with, kind of hardening encryption on end devices. I think physically securing edge devices is very important because that's where a lot of data is stored or being processed at the edge. Those need a little bit more attention than other things. But yeah, as far as I know, some of the like detection biometrics, things are innovative, and some of the like data security on endpoint devices.
Cool. And then another question that just got snuck in under the gun here. So it said, what is the trend for passwordless policies?
Uh, I haven't seen too much. I like the concept of it, with like a risk-based access control thing. I think people are implementing that too, to where like once you input your password, then most of the other verification is either automated or like through your phone on like a two-factor thing. In government, I have not seen, I don't know if I have seen any implementations of passwordless authentication. I've seen a lot of discussions of it in like private sector spaces, but not really much in state, federal, or local government.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. The information was massive. So all of you listening, the recording of this is going to be made available so that you can go back to review any of Aaron's slides that had a wealth of information on it. So again, thank you so much for joining us today and taking time to answer some of the questions at the end of your presentation.
Yeah, thank you
Uh,
for having
and
me.
yeah, and to everybody that joined, thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you next time on one of our next webinars.
Yeah, me
Thank you
too.
all. Thanks, Aaron.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.